Welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the boiling point, whether it's been reached in Venezuela, what with an opposition move to recall President Maduro. And we have all sorts of shortages and power outages afflicting the country. With us from Caracas, Andrew Rosati, reporter for Bloomberg News. Joining us from Washington, Mark Weisbrot, co-director of the left-leaning Center for Economic and Policy Research. Venezuelan opposition supporter Paula Dumergue is with us here on set. And from Chicago, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez of business consultants Green Mantle. Before the break, we were talking about how it was all coming to a head, who to blame. And there was Mark Weisbrot pointing the finger at the United States. Now, it should be pointed out that when Washington's normalization of ties with Cuba was recently in the news, with Nicolas Maduro on edge, especially after Barack Obama renewed targeted sanctions against his entourage. And last month, in an interview with CNN's Spanish affiliate, he said the sooner the Venezuelan people can elect a government that they have confidence in, that is legitimate, and that can pull them out of the spiral they were in, the better for all of us. Let me begin with you, Andrew Rosati. Has Washington's remarks, how have they gone down inside of Venezuela? Is Washington interfering?
Washington's remarks have certainly upset the government here. I think Maduro often makes reference to these remarks, and he uses this and uses this and tells Venezuelans that Washington is plotting against them. As my colleagues have brought up, there is a lot of finger pointing going on right now. And I would just like to say, I think that the mood on the street, where people tell me, whether they're in the slums, whether in supermarkets, whether in office buildings, people are very frustrated with things like corruption. They're very frustrated with things like empty store shelves, lack of medicine. And beyond all this finger pointing, people, the sense I get, are looking for a solution to their daily problems. Many Venezuelans don't have the luxury of being able to integrate abroad, so they're looking for solutions to these day inconveniences, at times that could even be life-threatening, as it's something to do with the medical sector or the crime factor or many others. So rather, the sense I get from talking to people on the street is they want answers, and they want them now, because this decline, this downward spiral in Venezuelan society has been going on for a number of years now, and people are very tired.
Daniel Landsberg, is the Obama administration part of the problem or part of the solution?
I don't think they're, at this point, clearly either. What you have in Latin America sort of writ large right now, you mentioned earlier that there had been little preparation by Venezuela for the bust cycle, for the bust end of the boom-bust cycles, for which Latin America is justly famous. And as a result of that, basically the political panorama became a bit like a game of musical chairs, that as soon as the music stopped, depending on how close you were to your recent election, or to your next election, either the president would get elected out of power, as happened in Argentina, or there would be some other process to try and get out of what suddenly become very, very unpopular presidents. These are presidents that were at 60, 70% 4 or 5 years ago of popularity, which are suddenly at 20, 30. I think Dilma Rousseff's in the single digits. You know, that is basically something that creates a lot of pressure socially and among opposition groups to try and shake up the leadership structure. Unlike Brazil, Venezuela doesn't have an independent judiciary. The head of the Supreme Court herself once said that separation of powers weakens the state unacceptably. The Electoral Commission is known to play what they call kikiriwiki in Latin America, or at least in Venezuela, with a certain frequency, and show a level of favoritism which would be unusual in most developed democracies. So now that you have, for the first time in a long time, a separation of powers issue in Venezuela, you're getting a separation between essentially the government and the legislature. And that creates a lot of new frictions, which are being explained away with the same old arguments that everything that goes wrong either in Latin America or outside of it. I mean, the government's official stance on the earthquake that leveled Port-au-Prince was that the CIA had an earthquake ray. You know, the type of inventiveness, it's the weather, it's the gringos, it's the Zionists, it's the Colombians. There's always an enemy, some secret, sinister cabal that is responsible for everything that has gone wrong in Venezuela since the beginning. According to the official version. And that's something that is so deeply lodged into the narrative, which is unfortunate because it means that there's very little, there's no feedback cycle. There's no one telling Maduro, actually, this might not work. Maybe it's important to do this or that, because what the government rewards above all is loyalty. Not necessarily competence. And we're seeing the fruits of that. After what should have been $1 trillion oil windfall during the biggest boom in oil history for the country with the world's biggest oil reserves, you have some of the smallest international reserves in Latin America. You can't import anything. Or a lot of investors are looking to Venezuela as a potential default risk, one of the higher ones. I mean, these are problems that are caused by governance. They're not caused by the CIA or by El Nino or by any other scapegoat that you might hear in the official press.
All right. Well, disagreeing with you on the hashtag F24 debate is one viewer. No, Maduro shouldn't be recalled, but the U.S. elite should be kicked out. Paula Dumergue, your reaction to that?
Well, actually, I disagree completely because Maduro should be recalled and he will be recalled because I completely believe in that. And I am proud of the fact of seeing lines for the first time in many years that are not just to buy food, but are just to sign proudly and just against this government that is the cause and the reason of the catastrophic situation. Actually, I think it is pretty important that we kind of remember what happened in December. It is that the National Assembly that was elected, it was the first turnout for this government in elections, because we have an assembly that was elected by the people and that had an absolute majority. And I think what we have to keep in mind is that the government, not only they just blot completely what the people's will was, is through particularly the National Supreme Court in Venezuela and impeaching 3 parliamentaries of their seats and robbing the Venezuelan people of the absolute majority. And I think this is important because at this time in Venezuela, things are trying to change just of course, to make better the quality of life of people, starting by their basic needs. I think of one of the main initiatives of the assembly right now, which is of course the amnesty law, just to free political prisoners, to take them out, and they are political prisoners because they disagree with Nicolas Maduro and his government, and they are there, and the process is completely outrageous, and it doesn't suit at any court or any law, and I just think the government is just going to be out because Nicolas Maduro has proven that he is not worth of an heir of Hugo Chavez.
All right, another reaction on the hashtag F24 debate. Maduro blatantly disregards the will of the Venezuelan people. Venezuela is living a humanitarian crisis. Mark Weisbrot, let me ask you, we've seen the differences over this issue, but what was your reaction when you saw that warming of ties between the U.S. and Cuba, and what impact will that have on Venezuela?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, it shows you how committed the United States government is to regime change, extra-legal regime change in Venezuela, because they still have sanctions against Venezuela, even after they gave up on 50 years of embargo, and well, they haven't given up on the embargo, but President Obama wants to get rid of it. And why are they doing this? Because the U.S. is still a very powerful and influential country in the hemisphere. You know, part of its influence is through the media. It influences the international media. It can create false impressions of all kinds of things. You know, most of what you showed on this show is true, but a lot of what you see in the media about Venezuela has been grossly exaggerated for years. The reporting when the economy was booming between 2002 and 2008 was very much like it is now. Everything was supposedly on the verge of collapse. It was bad news all the time, every day. And, you still have this now. You have, look at the debt, for example. In January of last year, they said that Venezuela had a 68% chance, and that was the markets too, of defaulting on its debt. Well, that year has gone, within a year, that year has gone by, they didn't default. They probably won't default this year either. And so you have that. You have the media reporting that there's a 70 or 80% poverty rate in Venezuela. Totally ridiculous. There's no economist I know that believes that. So even though the news is uniformly bad, they still have to make it worse. And so this is part of the United States efforts. That's where they can be blamed. I'm the last person who's going to say the government is off the hook for, their economic mistakes that have led to the crisis. They made mistakes. And the same is true in Brazil, by the way, which is even more self-inflicted in than Venezuela, the recession, that is. But, someone mentioned that the rule of law, you have rule of law in Brazil. Well, you have a guy the judge who's leading the investigation against the government, who had the former president detained, called 200 police, notified the media in advance, and put on a whole show, and then released wiretaps of the president talking to Dilma talking to Lula, Lula talking to his kids and his lawyer. I mean, this is not an impartial judiciary by any means in Brazil either. So what you have is, people who are taking advantage of the downturn to remove these governments through an unconstitutional process. And I think that is what you've seen repeatedly. And in 2013, for example, there was absolutely no doubt about who won the presidential election, and yet the United States was the only government in the world who refused to recognize that results until it was forced to by the OAS and everybody else in Brazil, and everybody piled on. So you have a constant attempt to delegitimize this government, to take advantage of the economic crisis, and if they don't get this, if they want to get rid of this government through extra legal means, this is what I'm worried about. They will get support in Washington, because Washington is already supporting them with the sanctions, with the millions of dollars, and with the media effort. They tried to delegitimize this last election. They had a whole campaign. Let me just finish this one point, because it is, after all, 3 against 1 here, as is typical, on these shows. Not on this particular station, which in the past you've had more balanced debate. But, look at the last election in Venezuela. You had a huge campaign in the international media, which of course always spills into the Venezuelan media, to delegitimize the parliamentary election, led by the head of the OAS, who was doing it for the United States, and saying that the election was going to be a fraud. And what happened? The opposition won a 2/3 majority in the assembly, and the government conceded before the votes were even counted. So, this is the kind of thing where you're going to see this all the time, and you have to be really careful of what you're listening to in the media, because it's always just one side of the story. Let
me bring in Paula Dumerg on this. So,
thank you, François. Yes, actually, I have to react. I'm sorry, if the U.S. is in. I think the U.S. is in. And you know why the U.S. is in? Is because the United States have saved the government, because the Venezuelan government had to import, at the beginning of this year, 550,000 barrels of oil, because we that have the largest oil reserves in the world were not even capable to extract this oil to satisfy our own needs at home. I think also I have to react to the fact that it's just of course, this government is not legitimate. They hadn't even just...
The president was elected.
Yes, but the problem is that there was such a small difference, and that was just, of course, a fight that the opposition decided to just aside, because the government and Nicolás Maduro said himself that he was going to count all the votes in paper, because the voting in Venezuela is electronic, and he didn't want it, and the opposition tried and forced and didn't of course got that objective. But as we are Democrats and we believe that democracy is the only way, what we're doing now is that we want to do is to impeach the government, and it's a popular impeachment, because we need the signatures of almost 4 million people to do a revocation, and after the revocation to be effective, we have to have more than the votes that were needed to elect President Maduro. So I think that this point is actually is absolutely out of this debate.
And the Maduro government, pointing the finger at the U.S., rolled back the clock to 2009 when Barack Obama entered office, and in his first summit of the Americas, where after the predecessor of Maduro, Hugo Chavez, had likened Barack Obama's predecessor to the devil, Chavez offering Obama a copy of Eduardo Galeano's The Open Veins of Latin America, 5 Centuries of the Pillage of a Continent.
I'm sure he's a smart man, and he knows what the book means.
Is it true that you want to be his friend?
Yes, and I've just made that very clear to him. We've spoken about very important matters, and I've taken notes on a couple of ideas. It's been an extraordinary meeting. Too bad it wasn't broadcast. However, there were expressions of optimism and goodwill and of moving forwards.
Andrew Rosati, when you listen back to Hugo Chavez in 2009, could that relationship between Washington and Caracas have gone any different? And just how much do Venezuelans miss Hugo Chavez?
I think it's very easy to pick up on, whether you're looking at poll numbers or you're talking to people in the streets. There was a huge amount of love and adoration for Chavez here. Now, looking at the same numbers and talking to the same people, Maduro does not command that same amount of respect or adoration from average Venezuelans. I think that's very easy to see looking at numbers or talking to people on the streets. Looking about the U.S.-Venezuelan relationship, again, I'm not to repeat myself, but when you talk to Venezuelans, the frustrations are mainly day-to-day, and these arguments often don't come into my interviews with people with what they're trying to do in their day-to-day. Right now, it doesn't seem, based on the president's statement, that he's ready for a type of rapprochement. The rhetoric has been very heated. The sanctions are still intact, so it's very hard to say if there's going to be some rollback of tensions in the near future. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Daniel Landsberg, what's your prediction on that?
Well, with the U.S.-Venezuelan relationship, I think that there's going to be a very important sort of point, which has to do with how well the institutions that Venezuela does have work, how much they the theory of the institutions is reflected in the practice. And this recall referendum is going to be a very interesting way of looking into that, because it's going to activate certain areas like the Electoral Council that usually aren't activated outside of elections when there's a lot of other noise. And one of the reasons I think that we're seeing some of the government policies towards the energy shortage, the closing down of various parts of the public sector, including the electoral authorities, who will now only be working, I believe, 4 hours a day on Monday and Tuesday. That's something that could conceivably slow down this process a great deal, which is crucial, because depending on when it happens, if there is a recall referendum next year, then it might not lead to new elections. It could theoretically lead to a vice president taking over, either Aristóbulo Isturiz, the current vice president, or whoever happens to be in that spot with the sort of rotating carousel of ministries that this government is used to using. So there's a lot of questions that still remain to be seen as to under what circumstances are these institutions extensions of the national executive, and to what extent are they, as they appear to be, as Venezuelans deserve for them to be, apropos the national constitution of 1999.
And on that score, you heard Mark Weisbrot say that the solidity of institutions is worse in Brazil. Do you agree?
I disagree. The legislature in Brazil is very chaotic. The PMDB, it's a giant metronome. It's a system that I think incentivizes corruption because of its design a lot more strongly and clearly than Venezuela's does. But Venezuela's National Assembly has historically been very corrupt and very partisan. Mark mentioned Judge Moro using secret tapes of the private discussion between Lula and Dilma and putting them on TV. Well, you can go on Venezuelan state TV and watch Con el Mazo Dando pretty much any week, and you will see private Venezuelan citizens secretly audio taped. And, you know, sometimes those are placed on national cadenas. Those are played on every television station by law, courtesy of the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution. So there's a lot of sort of distortions of what should technically be independent powers.
All right, very briefly, and I'm going to put this to Andrew Rosati because we're almost out of time. Andrew, we're seeing, and it was striking when we talked about Brazil, it was the same thing. We see this sort of left-right divide, which is really becoming more and more polarized. How bad is it in Venezuela?
I think it's very bad, the polarization within the country. But at this point as well, again, things are deteriorating so fast. It's a very general frustration towards all political leaders. There's a huge disconnect that people talk about that no one is worthwhile, that no one has their views intact. There is a recall. On either side, I hear this all the time, whether it's from cab drivers, whether it's from business persons, whether it's from people in the bakery, that that there's no light at the end of the tunnel, because many of these processes that are in place that are being pushed right now, analysts say they could take a very long time. My colleagues probably have a much better understanding of the Venezuela legal process than I do, but what we're seeing and what everything is told to me, that these can take months, if not years, for some of these things to take hold. More and more, these elections often take weeks, if not months, just to roll them out. So, and again, I keep saying this, but people are looking. They don't want to wait 8 hours in line to find corn flour. They don't want to wait, run across the city looking for cancer drugs or diabetes medicine. They want some instant relief. And what I hear from talking to a large diversity of people is, this isn't something that's going to change overnight. Not going to change overnight. Andrew Rosati, I want to thank you for joining us from Caracas. I want to thank Mark Weisbrot in Washington, Daniel Landsberg Rodriguez in Chicago, and of course, Paula Dumerc for being with us. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next.
Thank you, François.
Enter James Creedon. How are you, sir?
Hi, François. Just taking a look at how the crisis in Venezuela is playing out on social media. So with opposition calls for a referendum to have Maduro recalled, we're seeing on social media people signing petitions. In fact, I think over 4 million names are required for that petition to have any effect. And here you have a 92-year-old woman who is signing that petition. You can see that image there being shared on social media. So there are people trying to show the extent to which there is rising and mounting opposition to the way, I suppose, the country is being run. And the hashtag Venezuela en crisis, I think that's pronounced correctly. Venezuela.
Help us out here.
Venezuela en crisis.
In crisis, thank you. I understand the meaning, but the pronunciation is maybe a bit faulty. And the two-day week, of course, being one of the main indicators of the crisis because of power shortages. This is the end of
There was a bit of jealousy in the newsroom when they heard that.
Right, and we'll have a tweet at the very end showing where this could potentially be an advantage, François. But in any case, for now, people focusing on why it's a problem. And you have people, of course, sharing videos as well. The fact that this has spilled over into street violence. Deutsche Welle here in one of their tweets pointing to the fact that this is really affecting people's daily lives. If we have lunch, we don't have dinner, is one quote that they got from a lady speaking of her economic woes. This is really affecting people in very real real ways. Now, another hashtag that we're seeing is Maduro is darkness. Now, this, of course, is a reference to power cuts, but people are linking that to the whole notion of socialism and communism, and opposition leaders have been taking full advantage of that, such as Enrique Capriles here saying, well, let's revoke the darkness, in other words, linking it to the leadership in question. So certainly opposition taking advantage of the power cut for various different metaphors. You also have satirical websites such as El Chiguire Bipolar, talking about, well, one advantage here is people are developing night vision in Venezuela. Also, perhaps we're going to miss out on the 4 hours of live Maduro television addresses because people don't have access to television. And also a 2-day week means a 5-day weekend, which could perhaps boost the birth rate in a Venezuela in crisis. I think that's tongue-in-cheek. It is a pretty serious problem, but I suppose there is a degree of humour as well on social media about a 5-day weekend in Venezuela.
All right. We'll check the birth rate. Many thanks for that, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.